We have an abundance of resources in this city and in this region that we would put to work.
We do not have enough sheltering options or housing options because our shelters are at capacity.
Now there's only 2.
Seattle City Council veterans Bruce Harrell and Lorena González are in a tight race to become Seattle's next mayor at a time when the city is facing significant challenges.
How do we deal with neighborhood safety?
From pandemic recovery to police reform. Which candidate has the best ideas for leading Seattle over the next 4 years?
Our tax system is incredibly regressive.
It's a high-stakes election.
It is going to require an all-hands-on-deck approach.
Picking Seattle's next mayor, next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Who will Seattle's next mayor be? A lot of voters don't have an answer to that question. With mid-September polls showing 1 out of 4 Seattle residents is still undecided. Former City Council President Bruce Harrell won the most votes in the August primary and has presented a moderate platform that's gained support from Seattle's business community. Current City Council President Lorena González, a close second to Harrell in the primary, is promising progressive leadership and has the support of many local labor organizations. We're breaking down the stances of both candidates on homelessness, public safety, and Seattle's economy to help those many undecided voters make a choice at a critical juncture of the city's future on Election Day. Two politically familiar faces are facing off in the 2021 Seattle mayor's race. Current City Council President Lorena González and the council president before her, Bruce Harrell, who decided not to run again in 2019.
This is the time to redefine the city.
Harrell won the August primary with 34% of the vote and, as of mid-September, has raised close to $830,000 for his campaign. He's endorsed by former Washington Governor Gary Locke, former Seattle Mayor Norm Rice, current City Council members Deborah Juarez and Alex Peterson, and the Seattle Times.
My style of leadership is one that I empower people around me and we make decisions. All right, thanks, Mike. Thanks very much.
On homelessness, a top voter priority, Harrell differs from his opponent in saying that the city's current spending levels are sufficient to tackle the decades-old problem.
I believe we have enough resources, so you'll see other people saying, well, we can't do this because we don't have enough funding. We have an abundance of resources in this city and in this region that we will put to work.
Harrell also differentiates himself from González regarding the Seattle Police Department budget.
She clearly has a commitment to defund.
Harrell is referring to González and a majority of council members who supported a 50% cut to the SPD budget last year. Harrell says police don't need to go to every 911 call. But he says he wants to change the narrative on public safety without threatening cuts to the police department.
So I don't use a lens of funding to determine the outcomes that I want. I may decrease funding, I may increase funding, but first we define the culture and the outcomes we want to drive.
And when it comes to rebuilding Seattle's economy in the midst of the COVID pandemic, Harrell wants Seattle's core businesses to thrive again.
We'll build that new downtown, and I think therein lies a huge opportunity.
Businesses have poured about $491,000 as of mid-September into an independent expenditure committee supporting Harrell, but he insists he's not a business candidate.
I say I'm the people's candidate, and if there's one constant trait that everyone knows in this city, and I've been here my entire life, is no one dictates to me what I will do.
Lorena González says her 2021 mayoral campaign is about bold, progressive leadership.
I want to put my experience over the last 6 years and my public service over the last 6 years to work for the people of the city.
She gained more than 32% of the vote in the primary and has raised more than $577,000 for her campaign as of mid-September. González is endorsed by U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Planned Parenthood Alliance advocates, and the Sierra Club.
It's still relatively safe.
She says on homelessness, Seattle simply doesn't have the shelter space it needs.
On any average day, there are only 8 beds available for the nearly 4,000 people experiencing homelessness.
González wants to rapidly increase the amount of shelters and wants to pay for that with continued taxes on big businesses and other possible progressive revenue sources.
I think that the next mayor has a huge responsibility to scale up the resources that are going to be needed to really truly meet the needs of the 4,000 people who are currently unsheltered in our city.
When asked about her support last year for cutting 50% from the police department's budget, she responded,
"We need to continue to look at alternatives to law enforcement."
The actual cut to the SPD budget was about 17% last year. And González says she wants to put more money in community-based solutions. She says years of increasing funding for the SPD has not led to a meaningful decrease in crime.
So we know that just doing more of the same is not going to actually answer the question of public safety and neighborhood safety.
With the economy, González says beyond downtown, she wants to help neighborhood business districts survive the pandemic.
Many of our small businesses have not made it through. Some of them are still struggling to make ends meet.
González has most of the major unions backing her campaign, and a union-led independent expenditure committee supporting her has $453,000 to spend as of mid-September.
So I am focused not on our largest, wealthiest corporations, but on our small businesses to make sure that they have the support that they need to be able to continue to be part of our community and be the good employers that I know many of them are.
So, are you still undecided? The two candidates for Seattle mayor are eager to change your mind.
I think I have an opportunity to change the narrative, change the culture, uplift what we're trying to do, and create opportunity for everyone. At the end of the day, it's opportunity for everybody.
I'm excited to be able to put forward a platform that focuses on making our city vibrant, livable, and safe.
And here we are with Lorena González and Bruce Harrell, and we had a coin flip before the show. Council President González, you'll be going first here. Why are you running for mayor? And please keep it to a minute in length.
Sure. Well, thanks, Brian, for having us here today. It's my pleasure to be here with you. Listen, I'm running for mayor because I am ready to continue to work for the people of this city. I have been a devoted public servant for the last 6 years for this city as your council member, working on some of the city's most progressive legislative wins and policy wins. And of course, that's not where my work began. I started my public service to the people of this city as a civil rights attorney, where for 10 years I fought for children, for women, for the elderly, and for people of color who did not have access to justice to create systemic transformational change. So I'm running for the city of Seattle to build a vibrant, sustainable city that is really rooted on justice and on equity and on making sure that we are holding those who are the wealthiest in our city and our most profitable corporations to require those entities to pay their fair share to help solve for the issues that I know we're going to talk about here today.
That's right. We're going to dive into those in just a little bit. Former Council President Bruce Harrell, tell us, if you would, why you're running, and keep it to a minute, if you would.
Well, thank you, Brian. Quite candidly, to solve homelessness is one of my first charges. That I think that the city is sort of starving for that kind of effective leadership coming from City Hall. And I say City Hall not to point fingers at the mayor, the city council, the city attorney, that I think that the city wants, the people want to see a well-functioning machine. And I think the kind of decisive and strong and effective leadership from the mayor's office will sort of lead the way. I believe that small businesses, as an example, need to be revitalized coming out of COVID. And again, I think that someone that has the skill set to be able to work with these small businesses to help people get back on their feet after COVID is going to be critical. And police reform, we know how big this issue is. At the end of the day, people want effective police. They don't want biased policing. That's why I passed the bias-free policing law. They want to feel safe, all neighborhoods. And this is a unifying element if you look at rich neighborhoods or poor neighborhoods or everything in the middle and that crosses racial demographics, that people want to feel safe. So I'm running for mayor for these deliverables, and I look forward to your questions this afternoon.
Bruce, actually, let me stick with you on this one, because talking about ending homelessness, your campaign talks about this and also says that the funding needed to do this can come from dollars we already have at the city, state, and federal levels. Let's talk about your plan for homelessness and how you would pay for it.
We have to have that mindset that when we're spending north of $150 to $200 million from the general sub fund, and we will get another $116 million or so from federal funds, that we will be able to raise a lot of money from the philanthropic communities, and we'll take advantage of the progressive tax revenue that the city has imposed by virtue of the tools that the state has given them. We will have a lot of money coming in. What I do not think that we've convinced the public of is that we're spending this money efficiently or effectively. And we don't have a published plan that's on board, on a dashboard, such that people could measure it and see, cost per unit, cost per person, that we're able to really get people the individualized case management services that they so desperately need. So given the asset base that we have, given the tools that we have, given our ability to make smart sites in terms of transitional housing or even permanent and sustainable housing, I think that all of the pieces are there. But what's missing again is that coordination, that quarterback, if you will, making sure that we're actually doing the work. Because when you see what you see in Seattle, and the people see it every single day, they're thinking, why aren't our tax dollars working for us? And so I'm going to use the existing revenues that we have and make sure that they see the action that they deserve.
All right, thank you very much for that. Lorena, I want to talk about your plan on homelessness and how it's different from what Bruce is talking about, especially when it comes to paying for it.
I hear from folks on the need to address this crisis from a humanitarian level every single day. And I do agree that solving the homelessness crisis is in Seattle the number one issue for the next mayor. And it is going to require an all hands on deck approach that frankly leaves no solution off the table. And so I believe that the way we do this is by rapidly building more affordable housing, by creating better mental health and addiction services for unhoused Seattleites, by tackling seriously the skyrocketing cost of living in our city, and also making sure that we're tackling things like our inclusive zoning policies to allow people to live in and throughout the city. And multifamily housing is critically important. We also need to invest more in things like equitable development to allow for anti-displacement and anti-gentrification to really take a hold as we continue to grow as a city. I believe we pay for all of these things by taxing the wealthy and our largest corporations in the city who have profited disproportionately from this pandemic. And while certain corporations in our city have enjoyed profits beyond 220% during this pandemic, we also know that the average Seattleite has accumulated about 14 months of overdue rent. And so we have a responsibility, the next mayor has a responsibility to acknowledge that inequity and to tackle this upside down tax code system in our city together in a coalition to make sure that we are truly making a meaningful change and that we are investing in the programs we know that work, which are all incorporated in my plan to rapidly rehouse folks and address the underlying causes of homelessness, which are fundamentally about poverty and inequality.
Bruce, I want to go back to you here if I could. Your campaign materials say you'll ensure that city parks and public spaces will remain open and clear of encampments. This issue of visible homelessness, as it's been called, has become a lot more acute during the pandemic. We all know that. So how would you meet that challenge of ensuring parks and public spaces are clear if you're elected?
Frankly, just by taking action. And when I say take action, we're not talking about sweeps, moving a person who's experiencing homelessness from one place to another. I don't think there's any disagreement that we have to be very aggressive in how we treat people, whether it's addiction, whether it's health issues, mental health issues. But we also have to realize that people should have their parks, that their water should be clean, that they should feel safe in all of their neighborhoods. And so even on the issue of police reform, I don't use issues like statements like defund because I think that people may misunderstand what we're trying to do. And so I also loudly talk about people's right to enjoy their parks. And so I don't think that one methodology excludes the other. And I think that in Seattle, what we're saying, and I've been in Seattle for a while, that when people are saying that they want their neighborhoods back, their school parks back, they want their children to be able to play and not around needles, they should have that, and that the city's responsibility is to make sure it is clean and it is safe. And so that's why I talk openly about that, and we'll achieve that work.
How do you do that? How do you clear those people out of parks if you're not talking about sweeps?
Let me tell you how we don't do it.
Okay.
What we're doing, we're ignoring it. We walk past these so many encampments. Last night I was downtown and there were tents right on the sidewalk right downtown that I had to literally walk in the street to get around. We don't do it by ignoring the needs of these people that are living on sidewalks, as an example, or in parks. What we do is we bring in the right case managers. We dashboard it so we can see who these people are. We get information from them. We use whether it's social workers or people very experienced in mental illness and drug addiction. We make sure that we double down in our approach, but we don't ignore it. And so whether it's whatever if we want to call it the navigation team or the hope team or whatever these outreach workers are called this week, that will make sure that they are there and that the public sees that we're heading in the right direction. What I think we're seeing in so many cases is simply just a blindness toward it. And I think that's why voters are so up in arms about the change that we need.
Okay. Lorena, I want to make sure I get to you on this and talk about your approach to keeping public spaces clear of encampments. How would you tackle that specific issue of how and when to clear out homeless camps if you're elected? Would we see a change in current city policy? What can you tell us?
I recognize that as hopefully your next mayor, I'll be taking office in the middle of winter. And because of that, I feel a sense of urgency to save lives, to move rapidly to assess the encampments that currently exist in our city, and to do that in conjunction with our service providers and with our housing providers, and quickly work with those same individuals to identify which people we can move immediately into things like vacant hotel rooms, tiny homes, and other spaces that are available throughout the city and the region, because we will be transitioning towards that regional homelessness authority.
Right.
And that will increase our capacity available to be able to quickly house folks who are currently outside. But it is absolutely important to stay committed to a no sweeps proposal as a means towards cleaning parks. The way we clean up our parks and address the public health and public safety impacts is to treat that issue. We don't sweep people out of parks. We pick up the syringes as a basic city service. We provide a place for refuse to go and pick it up regularly, not allow it to accumulate like we are currently doing now. It shouldn't matter what the color of the bag is that we're asking folks to use. What matters is dealing with the realities of the impacts of these encampments in a way that is humane and responsive.
But what do you do when those people are in parks? How do you respond to that? Will those people be allowed to stay, or how do you deal with that?
Our service providers are incredibly adept at being able to build that trust relationship with the individual who is saying no to the offer of service and housing, and to negotiate with that individual about moving to a place that is more appropriate. This is work that subject matter experts in our city know how to do and are currently doing. The issue is the volume. And so if we isolate it to just that very few small individuals who are saying no, then I think we will have reached a place where we have effectuated some meaningful change in this area.
Thank you for that. Lorena, let me stay with you here, because I wanted to follow up on some of these ideas about creating an economy where everyone prospers, as your campaign talks about, as we emerge from the COVID pandemic. You're calling for changes to our state's tax structure. We mentioned that earlier. You mentioned that earlier. A possible new wealth tax or progressive income tax. I know you'd be working on that at the state level there. You're also talking about some new progressive revenue sources at the city level, too, to help small businesses. I want to make sure I'm clear on this. What is your message to large employers downtown, smaller employers in our neighborhoods, if you're elected mayor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that. I think that my vision for the city is to make sure that we are creating a Seattle economy where everyone thrives. That is not the status quo right now. The status quo right now is that our small businesses in our neighborhood business districts have not fared well in this pandemic. They are struggling every day to keep the doors open, to continue to be good employers, and to continue to add vibrancy to our neighborhoods. And so we have to resist the urge to pivot only towards those businesses that are the largest, that have fared the best, and who frankly do not need subsidies from the city of Seattle to continue to prosper in our city. That doesn't mean that we're shutting the doors to them. It doesn't mean that we don't want them here as good high road employers. What it means is that we have limited resources at the city to dedicate to the recovery and the renaissance of our local economy. And we should be targeting those limited dollars and resources to those small businesses and workers of those small businesses who need our help as a government the most. That is not the large corporations who have seen skyrocketing profits during this pandemic. So that is where my focus will be, is to make sure that we have a citywide approach to economic security where everyone can thrive together.
Okay. Bruce, I'll go to you next here. Your website talks a lot about this, helping small and minority-owned businesses and the widening income inequality gap, which has been brought into full view during the pandemic here. How do you propose to close that gap? Are new taxes needed? Do big businesses need to pay more? What's your plan for economic recovery for downtown and in the outlying neighborhoods too in Seattle?
Sure. So I don't think there's any dispute at all, even when 15 candidates were running for mayor, that our tax system is incredibly regressive and that we will take drastic steps to make sure it is more progressive. And we understand the needs of the very poor and that large corporations have to pay their fair share of taxes. I don't think there's any dispute. In fact, I'm having discussions right now with state legislators on what that will look like. We have to remember that we have one of the most diverse state legislative bodies we've ever had. And through that, we're able to pass groundbreaking cap and trade laws and the HEAL Act and some of the climate change bills you saw. You saw 12 police reforms coming out of Olympia. I think they will tackle aggressively, if my discussions with these people are accurate, the regressive nature of our state income tax. So there's no doubt at all. But I would make 2 points. One is that we also have to be mindful of the long game in Seattle, that if our policies are not somewhat balanced such that we want to keep our jobs here, that we have to have still a strong job base. Seattle is an economic generator. And so while we will get our fair share of taxes paid by large, wealthy corporations, we also want to have policies to attract and keep small businesses and medium-sized businesses here. And we have to also remember that many of these small brick and mortar businesses, they are competing against the giant in the room, if that would be Amazon, as an example, in e-commerce. And so part of our platform really looks at those small business brick and mortar institutions that are competing to stay alive, who had thin margins. And this is going to be particularly important coming out of COVID. So the cities often must get out of the way. They must create incentives for businesses to work for each other. They must loosen up its regulatory structure to use the built environments so that they can have some flexibility, small restaurants as an example. So in our Office of Economic Development, we're going to be partnering with it to make sure their voice is at the table, to make sure they can thrive in a post-pandemic world.
Thank you very much for that. And Bruce, I want to follow up with you here because you told the Seattle Times you actually came out of political retirement after some public safety crises, like the CHOP last year, the organized protest area up on Capitol Hill. You agree with your opponent that armed officers should not be going to every 911 call. But I want to hear what differentiates you from Council President González when it comes to your approach on public safety and building a better relationship between the Seattle Police Department and City Hall.
Yeah, I've been running now for almost 6 months, and over 6 months, and I didn't realize that. And I always try to keep a rule that I don't really try to distinguish myself from any of my opponents. I didn't even do that during the primary, because I know what I'm looking for. Okay. And what I'm looking for is very simple. I would like 7-minute response times. I'd like to make sure that our police department is funded to the point to where we can optimize their effectiveness. I want bias-free policing rooted out, unreasonable force rooted out. So that will entail a whole new skill set of what we're looking for in officers and how they are trained. But I think this is a unifying element, that all people in this city, whether you're poor or rich or everything in between, they want safety for their children and their families. They want to feel safe in their neighborhoods. And so my approach will be that kind of narrative where the officers learn that part of their charge is to build trust in communities. Mm-hmm. You don't just say, trust me, you build it by being on the playfield, being at the coffee shops, being with people, showing that you denounce something like the George Floyd murder. And that's why I brought that graphic example up many months ago, is that I want them to be able to see the Seattle that I see and the team leaders around me see when we become mayor, that is not Seattle. We do not condone that kind of violence. And so you're going to see a culture change. And I spend a lot of time talking about culture change in the police department, because I think that's what's needed more than a new process per se.
Okay. Lorena, to you on this question here. I know the council has been on the path of cutting the police department budget over the past year, putting more funding into community-based solution. reimagining public safety. If you're elected, how do you ensure we have that public safety and also ensure we have buy-in for a reimagined SPD whose main officer union right now is working with an expired contract, as you know?
Yeah, I approach this work like I always have, which is fundamentally rooted in the understanding as a civil rights lawyer that the job of the next mayor is to make sure that we have a police department that is going to respect, honor, and protect the civil rights and the liberty of the people in our city. It is also my expectation that the police department is not effectively going to depolice and stop doing the work around public safety, which is what I think is currently occurring. So we need to make sure that the next mayor is going to pointedly and directly tell the chief and our police officers that it is our expectation that they focus squarely on what their responsibility is, which is to provide public safety services to the people of this city. And I think that's critically important to addressing the ongoing issues. We have a staffed police department and they have a responsibility to go out there in community every day, engage in community policing, and do the hard work of keeping our communities safe. So I'm going to continue to stay focused on making sure that we have the right functions represented at the police department and that it's the appropriate size, and that we continue to scale up quickly those alternatives to gun and badge jobs that are going to be much more effective at keeping us all safe.
Got it. Thank you very much for that. We're just about out of time. Lorena, closing statement here. I can give you about 30 seconds.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. I think the choice for the voters of Seattle between me and my opponent are stark and clear. And I hope that you all will take the time to get to know me and my positions, and that you will join us and vote for Lorena González to be your next mayor. We are ready to get to work for the people of Seattle. We want to work on those big issues, and we will effectively end homelessness in our city. We'll do that together with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right, Bruce, you'll get the last word here. Go right ahead and give you 30 seconds too.
Well, I look forward to hopefully being the next mayor. I sort of lead with more of a spirit of, I guess, a collaborative style that I think I could bring the best out of the city. That we've seen what finger pointing does with people who think they know all the answers, or perhaps are not working as collaborative as they should be. I know the city quite well. I was born in a modest situation here in Seattle, and I've been here trying to give the city all that I can. And as mayor, we have a phenomenal opportunity to change the narrative. To make Seattle a system where all of our systems are working, whether it's the police department or the transportation department, the whole ecosystem of the city. That's the city that I see, and that's the city I will build.
All right. Thank you both for this, and we will be right back. What are people saying on social media about the Seattle mayor's race? One writes, the next mayor of Seattle will face overlapping challenges around affordability, climate change, equity, health, safety, and more. Another comments, Seattle politics may officially be nonpartisan, but we all know there are two dominant political parties in Seattle, those with water views and those without. We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Coming up next week, the citywide race for Seattle City Council Position 8. Incumbent Teresa Mosqueda faces off with challenger Kenneth Wilson on the next City Inside Out. I hope you join us.